next kind of effect that I want to talk about is called a flanger. And in fact, I'm going to write the next one, that's called a phaser. Now the reason I've written both of these together is because flanging and phasing can sound very, very similar. And in fact, the method, the process of creating flanging and phasing technically is quite similar. It's difficult to explain the difference, but let me just say this. Let me explain. Flanging came first. So how flanging came about was, I think it was the 60s, they took the exact same recording, put it on 2 tape recorders, and then they played them at exactly the same time, so playing side by side. And what would happen is, because first of all, it was impossible, they did it by hand, they try and push play on both the machines at the same time, there would be a few milliseconds out. And what would happen is you get something called a comb filter. It's like a phasing effect that happens when you've got the exact same thing but not in perfect sync. And then what they discovered was, if they touched the open tape reel while it was playing, they could slow the one down and get it in sync and then out of sync and then in sync and then out of sync. And when they moved them close to each other like this by touching the tape, it would create a swooshing effect. It would go swish, swish, swish. And guys got quite good at being able to do that with their hand. They literally would have 2 open reel tapes. They'd play them together and they would like touch it with their hand, put pressure on the tapes to slow one down, speed the other one up. And it would create this swooshing effect. And the name that was given to that effect was a flanger. So that's the original way that they did it. Originally 2 simultaneous tape players. But then eventually, the gear manufacturers, this audio equipment makers came up with electronic equipment that could create this effect much more easily in a box that you could put in a rack mount. And then finally, when the software digital revolution happened with computers, the software makers worked out that they could create this flanging effect in a software insert plugin. And again, this is a very powerful effect that can be used in your music. It does create another kind of an effect. It's kind of slightly similar to a chorus effect, but not exactly the same. And it's very similar to a phaser effect. Phasing and flanging, technically, to explain the difference between the two is very difficult. But what I can say is they both have that swishing effect. Flangers and phasers were very big in the 70s. Also very big on things like electric piano and also guitar pedals. You get plenty guitar pedals that are flangers and phasers. These are 2 effects that are very, very important in modern music making. And they work very good basically on anything that's chordal, like electric pianos, guitars. They work well on vocals. They work well on anything that's melodic. They don't really work great on things that are hi-hats and tops. They don't really work well on things that are bass. They don't really work well on those frequencies. And then the next kind of effect I'm going to talk about is called the rotor cabinet. Rotor cabinet, also known as a Leslie speaker. Let's talk about organs. There's a very famous organ, a vintage organ called the B3. And what happened was, in the early rock days, when guys started to use organs, they came out with something called a Leslie speaker, which was a rotary speaker. So basically what would happen is this organ had 2 speakers on it, and the speakers used to actually spin around. And that spinning effect, can you imagine the sound is coming and then going like this? It created what was called the Leslie speaker effect. And a lot of organs sort of are connected and very closely related and synonymous with that Leslie speaker effect. And it is another technique. Now, originally, it was again a maintenance headache because these rotor cabinets used to break all the time. And I know that a lot of famous rock bands had like technicians and maintenance guys coming on tour with them when they toured around the world to fix these things permanently because they were always breaking. You can just imagine a speaker spinning around like this, it would break quite easily. And again, what's awesome about today is this effect has now been separated from the organ. You can use this effect on anything now. What's awesome about a rotary cabinet is the control you have. You can control the speed of it, how fast it spins, so you can imagine going wow, 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 or it could be very quick, like wow, 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 wow. So now it's been separated from the organ. It can be used on any sound that you can think of. The next one I want to talk about is called the tremolo. Tremolo is basically the modulation of the amplitude. So they're basically making the volume of a sound go up and down at a certain frequency or wave, and it creates this like quivering effect, like it goes ba 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 ba. Now, tremolo is originally connected to guitars and guitar amps. So especially in the old 50s and the 60s, they had guitar amps that had this tremolo effect, and it's synonymous with guitars and guitar amps. But today we have software versions of tremolo, and you can apply tremolo effect to any sound that you like now. So you can insert a tremolo and apply it to anything you like. And it is another kind of an effect that we have at our disposal. We can use however we want to use it in our music. As I said, these are the spices and the flavors that we can add to our sounds. In fact, I'm going to write there under Rotary cabinet, B3 organ. And under tremolo, I'm going to write electric guitar. Originally, these were the instruments they were connected to. And then the very last type of effect I'm going to talk about are called stereo spreaders. It's a whole group and class of effect that we have at our disposal. And what stereo spreaders do is they basically help us to take a sound and spread its spread to be wider. And the way they do that is that there's many different ways, using EQ and using phase and inversion and all kinds of techniques they have to try and make a sound wider than it actually is. And this can be used in mixing, it can be used in mastering, it can be used to try and just give a sound more spread and stereo width. And that can be a good thing, which can help a sound maybe stand out from the rest. It can help in your mixing. So there's a whole range of stereo spreaders out there in different ways to get stereo spread. I also said before, you can create stereo with a stereo delay. You can create stereo with reverb, because you can just imagine you can fit a mono signal into an echo room, and then you could have two microphones in different places in the room. You can get a stereo reverb. You can create stereo through chorus, because just imagine you have multiple pitch shifters going up and down and pan left and right. They can create stereo. Flangers create stereo phases. I suppose they could if you panned the two signals left and right. Rotary cabinet definitely can create stereo. Tremolo doesn't create stereo. Tremolo works with what it has. So there are other ways to create more stereo, but this is another way of doing it. Stereo spreaders use EQ and they use phase and things like that. So it's another tool to add to your arsenal, to your bag of tricks. It's a good idea to be familiar with every single one of these effects. Remember what I said to you? Think of it as EQ and compression is the foundation that good mixing is built on. But when it comes to reverb and effects, these 16 main types, this is like your paintbrush now. This is where you start to say, you know, I'd like that to be green. I'd like that to be red. I'd like this to be purple. I'd like this to be black and that to be white. If this is a meal where you're adding your spices, you're saying, I want garlic and I want cayenne pepper and I want spring onions and whatever it is that's going to add flavor. So these are like your spices that you're going to now use when you are making your music. And this is going to add a lot of emotion. Sometimes it's sound effects, sometimes it's transparent, but it's ultimately, this is the more fun part now of mixing. This is the part where there's a lot more creativity and artistic personal choice when it comes to your music. So anyway, guys, this is the 16 types of reverb and effects. If you enjoyed that lesson and you'd like to take your music mixing and mastering to that top 10 level, then we would love to help you over at advancedmusicproduction.com. Click the link to find out more about our AMP membership and our AMP private coaching programs.